Good evening, everybody. My name is Chaim Julian. I am chairman of the Democracy from Monroe County. Democracy from Monroe County is an independent political action organization dedicated to building and the progressive grassroots in Monroe County. We recruit and support progressive candidates at the local, state, and federal level, and sorry, my phone is not cooperating. We support progressive candidates, and we recruit and support candidates who support those issues. Tonight, we are hosting the second of the two forums. We'll be featuring the candidates for state representative, state senate, and U.S. representative from the 9th District. Before I do turn over the proceedings to the co-chair of our endorsements committee, I would like to thank Katz for taping this the proceedings and for future viewing either on television or online. Abby?
Just moving this because obviously people can't see me behind that. So it's my pleasure to moderate this forum. Our first hour is going to be House and Senate candidates. And first we have Paula Staley running for State House District 65. We also have Tiffany Grant running for District 60. And Shelley Yoder and John Zodi, both running for State Senate District 40. So we're going to start with candidate opening statements, and John Zodi will go first.
Well, good evening, Democrats and residents of Monroe County and Senate District 40. Let me start by thanking Democracy for Monroe County for hosting this forum tonight, and to Katz for taping it. And I'd like to thank all those who are running for office this year in our community. Giving voters choices in our elections is one of the very best things we can do. My name is John Zodi, and I'm running for State Senate because I believe our best days are ahead of us in Indiana, and because I believe, to quote the late Senator Paul Wellstone, we all do better when we all do better. For more than 20 years, I've served in higher education, state and federal government, and in politics with one mission: to make this state better. And I've been proud to join many of you here tonight, and those watching, in that fight. Indiana's gifts are abundant as a state, but so are our challenges. We don't keep up with our neighbors on income, and every Hoosier deserves a livable wage. We underfund and sometimes flat out ignore teachers in public education, and we must have a fully funded public education system that includes a robust and universal pre-K program. We talk about how great of a business climate we have in Indiana, yet we underfund our state's Environmental Protection Agency, and the issue of environmental sustainability is rarely discussed around the state. I believe we should take that conversation statewide to address climate change. We say we're a welcoming place, but our laws, and frankly the narrative from the Republican supermajorities at the State House, don't protect every Hoosier safely and equally under the law in Indiana, and we have to. We are locked in a constant battle over health care when there are Hoosiers out there with no access to affordable care, and ideology takes over again when it comes to keeping our children and public places safe from gun violence. None of these issues can be addressed if Hoosiers don't vote. Our right to vote is under attack in Indiana, and we must fight to make sure it is expanded. I have experience on the front lines of politics and government fighting to make this state better for my family and for all of us. If elected your next state senator, I will listen to you and fight for us at the Indiana State House on these issues and many more. Thank you.
Thank you to DFMC for hosting this forum tonight, and to all of you for joining in person and watching on Katz. I'm Shelley Yoder, and I'm running for State Senate District 40. 8 years ago, I was standing in my kitchen, and I was reading the newspaper when I had decided I'd had enough and moved from activist to candidate. I'd had enough of our elected officials denying global warming and the need for immediate action to save our planet. Enough of politicians in Washington and our State House being bought and paid for by the highest corporate bidder. Enough of our government not looking like the communities and people that they're supposed to represent. So I stepped up and put my name on the ballot and ran for office. And I'll never forget the support I received from DFMC's parent organization, Democracy for America, and being part of Howard Dean's Dean's Dozen was a game changer for our campaign for Congress in 2012, as it was for the 9th District. And I owe a special debt of gratitude to Chaim Julian for helping make that happen. And while we did not win that first race, it gave me great hope again. Hope that together, when a committed group of people, united by a common purpose, do come together, anything is possible. And over the last 8 years, I've seen it again and again. I saw it in two terms serving on the Monroe County Council for the better part of this decade, where we worked across party lines to enact a bold, aggressive agenda and to streamline local government and solve our most pressing challenges, like the opioid epidemic and alternatives to incarceration. I see it every day in the classroom, where we help students find what makes them come alive and be good citizens led by a moral compass. And I see it when we show up for our neighbors at the women's marches, at our churches, our community centers, and when our teachers and our LGBTQ+ siblings are at the State House rallying. I still have great hope for Indiana, but there is more work to do, and we can't stop fighting now. I'm Shelley Yoder. I'm a mom, I'm an educator and a progressive, and I'm running for state senate, and I hope you'll join me in this fight.
I'm Tiffany Grant, and I am running for State House District 60. As a teacher of 12 years, with a background in working with students as a crisis interventionist before that, I work hard every day to positively impact the lives of about 100 students. As a school building leader, I could positively impact about 1,500 people during the school year. As a state representative, I have the opportunity to positively impact over 60,000 Morgan County and Monroe County residents. And my work in the Indiana State House would potentially positively impact nearly 7 million people across the state of Indiana. As a state representative, I will work to keep the citizens of District 60 better informed about their state government. I will listen to you and bring your voice to the State House. As a teacher, I am well qualified to learn about all of the issues facing our districts, understand the impact of legislation on issues, find solutions to issues, work with my colleagues to get the job done, and along the way, educate my constituents about each of those steps. My goals as a state representative include working to support public education services, including providing better wages for teachers and better services for students. Expand access to wellness programs, including emotional health care and appropriate reproductive rights for women. And promote living wage job opportunities, including creating pathways for adults to seek training in trade careers and increasing the minimum wage for all jobs in Indiana. And the foundation for each of those goals and all of my work is a knowledge that each of us is created equal, no matter gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, and that we all are worthy of quality representation that works for equal opportunities for all people in the state of Indiana. When the needs listed above are being met for every single person, only then can we work together to build better communities for everyone. Thank you.
I'm Paula Staley, and I'd like to thank DFMC for inviting me here tonight to this forum. I'm running for state representative in District 65. I'm born and raised in Indy. I'm now living in Nashville. I'm a wife, a mom, a grandma, and a registered nurse. For my entire healthcare and public health career, I've watched families, including my own, struggle to prosper, and in far too many cases, struggle to even stay together. As a single mom of 3 for several years, I know what it's like to both work and go to school full-time. I know what it's like to be down to my last $20, and I know what it's like not to seek medical care because of a $10 copay. And I know what it's like to suffer in and overcome an abusive relationship. I'm running because in this year's session, I've seen time and time again family, and environmental issues voted down along party lines in the current supermajority Republican legislature that is totally captured by big moneyed interests. Indiana can and must do better. There is much that divides us these days, but there's much more that we can agree on. We can agree that strong families and strong public schools are the foundation of a strong community. And we can agree that in both towns and rural areas, people need access to health care they can afford. Families need support to fight the opioid epidemic and the stress of the everyday struggles, just to provide shelter for their families and put good, nutritious food on the table. To put good food on the table, families need access to grocery stores in our food desert areas. As the current COVID-19 pandemic has revealed, all families need access to health care and good worker benefits that include adequate paid sick time. We can agree that the environment we enjoy can't protect itself, from corporations that foul our environment, sicken and kill our children, to the state allowing clear cutting of our native hardwood forests, decimating the population of the northern long-eared bat that just a decade ago was Indiana's most common deep forest species, to the blue-green algae in Lake Monroe from urban and farm runoff and septic leachate. Steps must be taken to protect the hundreds of square miles of watershed drainage area that discharges into Salt Creek. I ask you to invest in the future of Hoosier families by going to paulastaley2020.com. Donate and volunteer to become part of our campaign. Most importantly, to vote for me, Paula Staley, to be your state representative in District 65. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're going to start the DFMC question part for the next 20 minutes. And after that, there will be about 20 minutes for audience questions. Candidates will have about 2 minutes to answer our questions. Okay. So this first question, we'll start from Shelley and go down this row and end with John. Republicans in the state legislature listed driving down health costs as one of their legislative priorities for the 2020 session. Considering current concerns about the spread of COVID-19, what health policies would you advocate for that can ensure preparedness for health crises, including but not limited to COVID-19?
Thank you. I would say that in the state of Indiana, we have seen that when we have greater access to health care, we have a stronger, more economically sound Indiana. And as your state senator, I would be working to advance the issues when it comes to infant mortality, maternal mortality, and the fact that Indiana leads our country in these two areas. These are areas that we can reach across party lines and address. When it comes to addressing the coronavirus, I would say that what we see is families, again and again, families who have access are going to fare better, but families who are scraping by and trying to make ends meet and can't get all of the supplies in order to keep their hands clean, all the loads of laundry, just basic supplies for their families, it is difficult. And so we should be paying attention to how the virus is affecting our minimum wage workers. And how we can do that is putting more money in their pocketbooks. And that's why one of the issues I'm running on is making sure that we are fighting for a $15 an hour minimum wage, at least. And when it comes to health care, expanding health care so every Hoosier has quality health care. Those are the initiatives that I will be pursuing.
Sorry, thank you. I really appreciate what Shelley was saying about paying attention to minimum wage workers and expanding health care. I think those are great starts and definitely things I would agree that we need to work on. I would also like to perhaps add that when we provide those better healthcare opportunities, we need to do that for families that are in areas that maybe a hospital doesn't profit in. So in Martinsville, in Morgan County, we don't have a hospital, right? We have an emergency room, we have doctor's offices, but we have limited access to healthcare just because like the hospital system doesn't feel like it can make money. It can't be profitable in Martinsville. And so realigning all of the insurance, all of the healthcare system to a system that isn't just based on profit, thank you, but really about people and doing what it needs to do for them, I think is really critical. Because one of the effects that we're seeing now, schools are having to close, right? Businesses are shutting down. People who are hourly workers in those places aren't going to get paid. So we need, and maybe that doesn't exactly answer the question, I apologize, but we really need to work to get those resources into people's hands, and just even better benefits, right? If you have to take 3 days off in a row, don't force people to get a doctor's note, right? If it's not something the doctor can fix, being able to stay home just to get well should be an option as well.
My turn? Okay. Thank you. So the way that I see that, and it is very personal for me, because I have been, like I said in my opening, in a situation where I did not go to the doctor because I didn't have a $10 copay. Vice President Pence was on television today saying that the private insurance companies, how great they are, because they have agreed to not charge copays for people to get tested for the COVID-19, and to cover Medicare and Medicaid will cover the costs of testing and office visits. What he didn't say was, what about the deductibles? What about the coinsurance? What about the people the 500,000 people in Indiana that don't have any insurance, the 8% of those people? I think what should happen is the state should pick up the tab for those people, for their office visits, for their testing, and the federal government should reimburse the state. This should be done through the state. Also, I think that there should be immediate unemployment benefits for people that have to self-isolate at home. And I think that's just about it. I think that would about cover it for this.
Thank you for the question. I think this really comes down to 5 different areas I would point out. First of all, I think the narrative that the Republicans are trying to drive down healthcare costs, I just don't believe it. They're trying to drive it down in the way they see it, but I think we have to look at where is our safety net in the state of Indiana. We have kids that go home from school for the weekend. There's a city in the state of Indiana that takes money out of its municipal budget to fund putting food in backpacks for their kids to go home, and I know there's a nonprofit here in Bloomington that does that. So I think we have to look at our safety net and where that is across the nonprofit community and in our communities all across the state to provide that assistance when needed, when there's a crisis, and even when there isn't, because not having food over the weekend is a crisis for a child. We have to look at Indiana being the highest uninsured state of all of our neighbors, and I agree with the other candidates that it is an issue of access. About a third of counties in Indiana don't have a hospital, and that's a problem for mothers, it's a problem for children, it's a problem for adults needing urgent care. So we've got to focus on access to care, prevention, where is that safety net, and making sure that if you do have that safety net, if you are working, and you are working in a job that you feel pays you a livable wage, that you have the ability to have the flexibility to stay home if your daycare closes or your school closes and you're able to stay home with your children if we do find ourselves in another public health crisis that we see right now. So it really does come down to access and making sure that we're looking out far in advance to protect that safety net across the state for families.
Second question. How will you help to move Indiana towards climate justice through the state legislature? And this time we'll start with Tiffany.
Thank you. I think a lot of where we need to start anyway is by changing the conversation. So we need to help people understand that it does impact every single person. I think a lot of times, and I was guilty of this in the past, and that I didn't worry about something unless it impacted my life very specifically. If it didn't affect me, then I didn't worry about it. But I think a lot of people feel that way. They feel like because their home is secure or because they feel like they have provided for a future for their children, they aren't worried about the climate. They're not worried about the environment. So one, we just have to get out there and help them understand better. But I think then we just need drastic policy change. We need programs that will get us renewable energy sources. We know they're there. We know that they're viable. We need to stop relying on the non-renewable energy resources. And I think that is probably the key to doing that.
I think that climate justice is really, as Tiffany talked about, is more about education to inform people that it's really a climate crisis, and that includes climate justice. We're moving in the wrong direction. At the State House, with not even wanting to close down the coal-fired energy plants and reducing the renewable tax credits, we're just, we're moving in the wrong direction in the State House. Climate change, the education aspect of that, people don't understand exactly what the long-term implications of global warming and what that's going to do as far as diseases and pests, insects, farming. So I think the basic underlying strategy would be education.
Thank you. Last week I attended the Sustainability Fund discussion that the city put on. It was great because it was a community discussion where you went to different modules and different tables talking about different areas of sustainability and environmental justice, and learning about what the issue of sustainability really is. One thing I've always said about climate change is for people who don't take it seriously or don't understand it or don't believe it, why do we take the risk of assuming it's not a thing and that we can spend waste any more time not addressing this crisis? Why? It's like I say about pre-K, you're only 4 one time. We only have one Earth, one life. We've got to make sure this is addressed at the state level, and it's not. Like I said in my opening statement, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management is underfunded, estimated by about $35 million. The issue of environmental sustainability, is not discussed really anywhere in state government. IU leads on it. The city of Bloomington leads on it. There are things we can all be doing. And I think there's common ground to be found with legislators from rural Indiana who maybe grew up composting, like my wife and I do now. Maybe my grandmother composted growing up. She had a canister next to the sink, probably because she didn't have a garbage disposal, but she believed in composting too. And there are things you can find on common ground. And the two largest impacts of climate change for Indiana, we learned, are flooding and drought and the issue of our changing temperatures. And those issues impact us in ways we don't even imagine, from agricultural production all the way up to one thing we discussed at the discussion last week was low-income folks who may not have air conditioning in their house. And if you get above the temperature of, I think it was 68 degrees, if temperatures stay at 68 degrees from a sustained period of time at night, that's not allowing your body to cool down while you're sleeping. And how many folks are out there across the state of Indiana that don't have adequate air conditioning or temperature control in their houses? So there are all kinds of things to look at with weatherization, all kinds of things the state government can do. And that's my time. So thank you.
I got involved in politics because of global climate crisis. And we need to be talking about a right to live legislation. It's interesting to think about how antiquated our state legislature is currently, because the bill that Paula is talking about with having difficulties in shutting down coal plants, that actually was against what our actual energy companies wanted. and it did not have full participation of the Republican supermajority. So right there, we do have friends across the aisle who we can look to help us pass right-to-live legislation. While it's generally assumed that coastal cities are going to share the brunt of climate change, what we know to be true is Indiana is on the front lines. Whether it is our soil, the health of our soil, whether or not we have soil, the health of our rivers, streams, and creeks, and whether we can breathe the air. Indiana leads when it comes to poor air quality and water to drink. We need to be responding aggressively with this, and as Tiffany was saying, making sure we're changing the conversation. We're missing out on opportunities to change the economy in Indiana and leading the economy for the rest of the country. We have, at one time they said Indiana could never have wind turbines. And in fact, we do have wind turbines and we could do so much more. But our state legislature is making it impossible to pass good legislation. But what we are seeing is people are coming around, and we need to make sure that we don't back down from this fight. We need someone who's going to be talking and talking loudly and not stopping talking about this. We don't have time to wait until everybody believes that this is a problem for Indiana. The time is now, and we need right-to-live legislation.
Thank you. So before we move on to our third question, which is our last question for DFMC questions, I would like to ask that if any audience members have questions, that they line up behind that microphone over there. And so the Indiana State Teachers Association recently held Red for Ed to urge legislators to increase funding to public schools and support public school teachers. Public education has not been a priority in Indiana. What policies will you advocate to support public education? And we'll start with Paula.
Well, first of all, I think that the private and the charter schools should give back the $68 million that they fraudulently stole. That would be a really good start. And so there's also a recent bill in the legislature that talked about the referendums. And with the legislature, I found, since I'm really not a politician, although somebody reminded me the other day that, well, now you are, because you're in this. But I haven't been a politician up to now. But there is a way that the legislature will name bills that make it sound like it's really for the public schools, and when you really dig into it, it's really not that way. You know, this is an example of that when they just recently wanted to give the local school districts the home rule advantage of deciding where their money would go by referendum. You know, whether it would go to the public schools or to the charter and private schools. So it's kind of a way that they, and you all are probably really familiar with this, how they kind of push towards the voucher schools, the charter schools, and the private schools at the expense of the public schools. I think, as I said in my opening, the public schools are the foundation with strong families of a strong community. And I think I can also say that there's the charter and the voucher charter schools and also the private schools are more, well, let me just say that the public schools have more diversity than private and charter schools. But my time's up. Thank you.
Is that what you mean? Thank you. Well, there were 4 areas where I would, out of the would consider them proposals because some of them they're already being discussed, and they're areas where I would fight hard. First of all, we pay teachers more than what they deserve. The governor ignored 20,000 teachers that were on the lawn of the State House on November 19th. We need to pay teachers what they deserve. We need to have a long-term plan for doing that. The ISTA asked for a down payment of $75 million for the governor, and they keep ignoring that, and they're kicking the can down the road. Number two, I would properly fund public education. We still haven't restored the $300 million that we cut 10 years ago out of the public education system in Indiana. We have split that funding, as all of us know, 3 ways between traditional K through 12 public education, charters, and vouchers. Number 3, I would, as Paula mentioned, I would have voted against the bill and the amendment that would have allowed charters to absorb school referendum money that was heard on the floor of the Senate last week. And number 4, I would fight hard to make sure that vouchers, first of all, I would work to end the state's voucher program, but a corollary to that is making sure that voucher schools can no longer discriminate against people in their schools, and they're accepting public tax money, and that's what's happening in the state of Indiana right now. Thank you.
I would first want to say that everything that you can see coming out of the state legislature really points to the lack of respect and dignity that we do give to public education and to our school teachers. First, we have to pay our teachers the wages that they deserve. The heart that they bring to this profession, they get into it because they love teaching and they want to make a difference. What an incredible profession and call on one's life. And we should be setting them up for success, not tearing them down that they have to supply their own classroom with the school supplies that they need in order to be successful day to day. So making sure our teachers know that we appreciate them through the way that we pay and compensate them. I would also make sure that they have the training that they want. The training that the state is asking them to get, this isn't the training that they want, that makes them come alive. And I know as a mom, I want my children, and I want all the children in Indiana to walk into a classroom, a public classroom, that the teacher is excited to see them and wants to teach them how to learn and how to think critically. That takes training. That takes renewed hope and energy in one's profession, and enabling teachers to be able to receive that kind of training. And finally, our school funding is broken. The way that the formula sets up, it really undermines our urban and rural schools. And in Monroe County, we have both. So the way that the school funding, the formula now funds schools, MCCSC in Richland, Bean Blossom, is left behind. And the way that the voucher is taken off, the voucher program takes that first bite at the apple, that must change. And as your state senator, I will be a fighter for public education first and foremost, and make sure that our students and our teachers have what they need to succeed.
Tiffany?
May I first request extra time? I'm just kidding. Okay, sorry. I agree with everything everyone on the panel has said. I agree. We have just recently lost $68 million because a charter school misrepresented their numbers. There has been a referendum that has passed that allows charter and private schools to share referendum money or take a chunk of that for themselves. I won't disagree. Teachers would like to be paid more. We'd like to be paid an appropriate wage that keeps up with the standard of living, right? For many, many years, we got a 0% increase. And now we're lucky to get 1 or 2% in the districts that can afford it. And that comes at the price, honestly, of larger classroom sizes and fewer teachers in the buildings. The things I would probably fight for most, I would love to see mandatory kindergarten for all kiddos. I work with Title I, which is a reading program for students who come to school behind. And we see a lot of kiddos who come to school and they don't know their ABCs yet. They don't know their numbers. They can't recognize any of those symbols. We're glad to have them, of course. We want them in our classrooms, but they aren't ready. If we could get every kiddo into kindergarten, that would help them be better prepared as they move into first grade. We need more adults in buildings, not just teachers. We need more caseworkers, social workers, we need more counselors. Right now, teachers are doing all of those jobs for the little amount that we're getting paid. And it's hard because we also have to do ISTEP testing and make our kids understand all of those standards on top of helping them deal with their home lives and the stress that they are struggling with. There's a lot to do for public education. I have 10 seconds left, which is not enough time to discuss all of it. There are lots of issues Indiana needs to face, but public education, honestly, I think would affect all of them. I think bringing up a stronger, better next generation will help us resolve a lot of the other issues that we're also facing.
Thank you. So we're now on to the audience questions. We ask that for the sake of time, you try to keep your questions to about a minute and also try to aim it at the panel as a whole. Anyone? Yeah? Don't all run up to the mic.
As white supremacy groups such as the American Identitarian Movement gain ground in our city and across our state, what do you propose to combat the complacency shown by local governments in allowing these groups to flourish?
Nice. So I think, who did we started with Paula last time, so we'll start with John.
Thank you for the question. It's a big one, and where we are with our state and where we are with our communities on combating white supremacy. I think it's always about education, making sure that we are talking to one another and that we are vigilant as people were over the summer, and making sure that we understand where one another's coming from, what community you come from, and that the bottom line is any discrimination, any ounce of white supremacy is not okay and should never be excused, and making sure that we have an opportunity to talk to one another, not necessarily talk to those who spread hate, but that we as a community are sticking together. We have a sign in our yard that says "No hate anywhere" in Bloomington, "No hate anywhere in Indiana, no hate anywhere in the United States." And I think we need to come from a common ground of understanding where each other comes from, and that the spread of hate has to be fought and combated no matter what, because it can bring down a community faster than anything.
According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, there are 1,020 hate groups in the United States, and American Identity Movement is one of them. And we have known of their existence in our midst, from flyers on campus to graffiti on buildings and selling produce at the farmer's market. But white supremacy is everywhere. We live steeped in white supremacy, so the fact that we have it at the farmer's market should come as no surprise or heartbreak. We have so much love and goodness in our community, and we have hate too. Racism is alive, and each of us, white folk, need to be proactive and relentless to address it, and root it out when we meet it within ourselves, or when we meet it anywhere. I personally don't feel free to go to the farmer's market because all of us don't feel free to go to the farmer's market. Therefore, none of us should feel free to go to the farmer's market. But hate, white supremacy, racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny is so much more than just the farmer's market. And we must do all that we can, and our work will never end. Tracy Blackman, a UCC minister and a friend, a prominent voice for social change when Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson, just miles from her church. She says, if you're uncomfortable talking about racism, you're not talking about it enough. Our white community have a lot of talking to do. We have a lot of talking to do, we have a lot of working to do, and we have a lot of listening to do. And that's what needs to be done.
I worked in Indianapolis Public Schools my first 6 years of teaching, and for me, that was the most diverse setting that I had ever been a part of. And it was eye-opening in ways that I didn't know, like I didn't understand about myself. And so I agree that education about racism and understanding is really valuable. But I also know that as an educator, reteaching takes time. And a lot of white supremacists or people who outwardly show racism have been taught that that is appropriate or okay. They have seen that on many different platforms. Reteaching does take time. So alongside of that, I would like to see stronger penalties for persons who exhibit those exhibit that hate, that racism, anyone who is putting up those signs, or just like hate speech. Like, I don't write a lot of referrals in my classroom, but that's the number one thing you'll get a referral for. We don't use that language. I don't care where you are. And so I really think stronger penalties, stricter guidelines, because we know that it's not okay. And while we re-educate and reteach, there need to be consequences that are followed through on.
Paula.
Oh, okay. So on the complacency issue, I agree that community education about racism is first. Officials that are complacent should be voted out. We didn't get where we are today in this country without diversity. I think these groups should be aggressively pursued as hate groups. I think it's really important to re-educate parents in the schools about diversity and about racism, because in order for the next generation to overcome that the racist ideals, it really needs to start at home also. So educating those parents, I think, is really key.
Thank you.
A question I have for all of you, although John and Shelley are in my district. This kind of harkens back to the issue of climate change and with regard to extreme weather temperatures that are frequently occurring. I'm wondering if you all would be in favor of advocating or authoring legislation at the state level to switch Indiana over to public ownership of utilities. A simple Google search told me that the operating revenue for Duke Energy, which is based out of North Carolina and is a multi-state company, they doubled their revenue over the past 10 years from $12 million to $25 million in 2019, and yet our federal minimum wage has remained at $7.25, yet everyone requires electricity. We require climate control of our homes, and I'm wondering if you will advocate for that.
Thank you for that question. I think good things happen whenever we have more cooperatives and more employee-owned businesses, and there is no reason why we can't look to our utilities to lead the way. And I would be interested in sitting down and talking about what that might look like and how we could get that moved through the state legislature and have that opportunity for Hoosiers across this state.
I'll be very honest, and I don't know much about public ownership in business, so I apologize for that. That will definitely be on my list now of things to research. I appreciate that question. But I think the point that you're making more broadly maybe is that people can no longer keep up with the price of goods, right? Their living wage has not increased, while all of the things they need to purchase has increased. And it doesn't take a high school math teacher to figure out that that doesn't work. So I agree. Like, if public ownership would drive down costs, which it sounds like it would, then I think that's absolutely the way to go. In any case, we need living wages for everyone, so that even those industries that we cannot force to give real livable prices, that everyone would be able to afford them.
So I don't really have a lot to say about that because I, like Tiffany, I'm not familiar with the details of the public ownership of the utilities, but any policy that will support families and help them to prosper is one I would take a really hard, good, supportive look at.
May I ask your name, please? Sarah. Sarah, I am a jack of many trades, but utilities is not one of them. And so I don't claim to be an expert on the utility issue. I would agree with Shelley that our REMCs, our co-ops, do a great job as member-owned utilities, but there's a lot more to the issue, and I'd be glad to talk to you about it any time. I won't speak as an authoritarian on public ownership of utilities just because I don't know enough about it. But thank you for bringing it up. How much time do I have left? May I ask Ramon? I'm sorry, a minute and a half. I want to go back, if I may. Can I go back to the previous question, Abby? Is that okay? Or do we need to move on?
We should move on. Yeah.
Great. Thanks anyway.
No do-overs.
Fair enough.
My name is Rob Deppert. The representation of the Democrats in the State House has dwindled over my lifetime and is basically at the lowest point that I can remember, and I've watched it for most of my life. We're down to 10 senators that are Democrats out of 50, and we're outrepresented 2-1 in the House of Representatives. So I think the question that I'd like to ask, and it is to all of you, but it may be more towards one person, should the chairman of the Democratic Party in the state of Indiana also hold an elected position? And isn't now a point where we need a full-time state chairman as opposed to somebody trying to wear 2 hats at one time?
Maybe I'll take that one.
Yes.
I think it's my turn to start, but I'll defer.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Rob. Well, if I were elected to the state senate, I would not be state chair anymore. I would resign. So if that answers your question there. During the primary here, we've taken certain measures to make sure there's fairness and things like that, but I would not hold the job of state chair and be a state senator at the same time. If that answers your question, or did you have more there? So, because we do need, you're right, we do need to keep fighting to get more Democrats at the State House.
As a person who's been personally affected by this sort of unprecedented in the state of Indiana for the Democratic Party, I've been taking good notes on what the experience has been like and making sure that going forward, is this something that we want for the health and wellness of the Democratic Party? It is staggering to talk about going to serve you with a supermajority in the state legislature, and there is so much work to be done. I know traveling throughout the 9th District, when I ran for Congress not once, but twice, it got to the point in 2016 that there was even a difference from running 4 years earlier. Just the disdain when people would find out that I was of the Democratic Party. And so we do have serious work that we need to do to make up for the last few years. And it's not just only 10 senators that are Democrats in the state Senate, but just 2 of them are women out of that 10. So we can do better, and parity is important. We talk about parity as a party, and I think that this is an opportunity to change that. We don't get the opportunity very often, but we have an opportunity come May 5th.
I like what Shelley said there about parity. Representation is super important. We see it in social media, we see it in media, when kids can see themselves in a movie or in a TV show, or even adults. I think that's super valuable. I know that's super valuable. I would like to see a broader, not just more women, more people of different ethnicities, more people of gender identity, more people of different sexual orientation. We need more careers represented in state legislature, just to bring different voices to the table. When you have a supermajority of one party, and most of those are perhaps lawyers or just a certain career field that lends itself more easily to politics, you lose a lot of ideas at the table. We need more people of different perspectives at the table together. And that's what I think we're lacking at the state legislature.
Right, we need more women in the state legislature. Right now there's, I think, about 20-some% of women. And we just have to keep fighting to break that supermajority because, you know, truth be known, there's no negotiation with somebody when they have with either party when they have a supermajority. You know, the best policy is made when there's compromise, and those numbers are, one way or another, a lot closer together than they are right now. That's what we're fighting for.
Thank you. So it looks like we have 4 more questions, and so I'm going to ask not only that people keep their questions as short and to the point as possible, but we're also going to go down to 1 minute per answer, which I know is challenging, but I believe in all of you. Okay, hi.
Hi. Unions across the country, but especially here in Indiana, are under attack with various legislation, such legislation as right to work, which is really more like a right to freeload. What will you do? What steps do you propose to make a union membership easier and make unions stronger in the state of Indiana?
Thank you, Chaim. First and foremost, I really appreciate your proper use of what that legislation really is, and I would work to repeal right to freeload, make sure that people have an opportunity to organize without fear, and to have representation. When we have strong unions, we have a strong economy. And when we have strong unions, they are fighting for greater benefits for hardworking families. So I would be working first and foremost to repeal right to freeload.
I would agree. I am a member of the teachers union, part of AFT in Martinsville High School, and I have a freedom when I go to work, not to do anything I want. I think sometimes people equate like unions with like protection that allows them to kind of do whatever they want on the job, and that's just not the case. But it does allow me the ability to go in and do my job to the best of my ability, and if I make a mistake or if I need retraining, that union provides it to me. And I feel like everyone should have that same protection, that same ability to negotiate as a group for better benefits and wages. For me, it's a really valuable part of what I have as a teacher.
I would also work to repeal right to work. I think the unions are really important. I myself am associated with National Nurses United in furthering health care for all. I think it's really important when the economy, unions are important in both when the economy is good and when the economy is not so good. And I think their power shifts based on that. But I think people should be allowed to organize freely without repercussion.
I would also work to repeal right to work, right to freeload as a good descriptor, Chaim. In addition, we have to protect the right to collectively bargain, and while we know these big laws have been passed over the last few years, there are little things that chip away at the bargaining process in the legislature, and our teachers have been impacted by that greatly. I would also work to restore a strong prevailing wage law in Indiana, which was repealed in 2015 when Mike Pence was governor. We need a prevailing wage law. When that was repealed, I said he signed a law, signed a license for Hoosiers to make less. And the folks on the other side of the aisle talked about how that would save school districts money and others money. Well, it cost members of the building trades and their families money. So I would work to restore a strong prevailing wage law in Indiana as well.
First, I want to just thank you all for running for office. I think it's an awesome thing, and you don't get enough praise for that, so thank you. My question is really directed to Tiffany and Paula about your upcoming race. You both are unopposed. So what have you learned from those who've run before you in your districts, which are entrenched, and how might you do things differently to make a difference and have a chance of winning?
I have worked, one of my mentors is Penny Giffens, who ran for this seat the last 2 election cycles. And she has been a wealth of knowledge and so helpful to me. I think that currently in District 60, at least in the Morgan County part of it, our biggest issues become for a lot of people the only issues. Our biggest issues being, guns and right to life. And so when those become the only issues that anyone cares about, it feels like we're very split. However, I think that there are some values, some priorities that we can all get behind. Education, healthcare, those better living wages. Those are things that are not or should not be partisan. Those are things that benefit every single person in District 60 across the state of Indiana. And if we can shift the focus there, I think we could be successful.
And I would say, I would agree exactly. Those right to life, those are wedge issues. And I agree that as I said in my opening statements, there are things, we're never going to agree on everything. But there are many things that we do agree on. I also have been talking to the folks that have run previously, and I think just talking and talking and talking to more voters and to be smart about the rural areas and how we communicate with them, and just showing up and showing up and showing up, and not allowing those wedge issues to put us off, I think is a recipe for success.
Mm-hmm.
I'll answer the question a little differently, maybe on what you've learned from people who've run before you. I think if I could count the number of people in this county who have been mentors, who I think the first thing is, I call them for advice, and you listen to them and talk about their experiences over their time in government or in elected office. I started in politics here as an intern and a volunteer in the party. And the number of people here, I won't name names because I don't know if they'd want their name named, but the number of people in this county, in this community that have helped me along in politics and have helped me understand issues, both from the local level to the state level, all the way up to the federal government level. This community is rich in its knowledge, and I will forever be thankful for the advice I've been given from those folks who I still call for advice and consider mentors.
I would like to add to what Paula and Tiffany commented on, and that is, in the state of Indiana, a new nonprofit started, and it's called 25 for 20. And it was women who came together in the Democratic Party and really felt that there had been not enough resources there. And so they started this organization to get 25 women elected to Democrats to the state legislature. And the 3 of us are part of that. And so I just want to say how much I have enjoyed our learning from each other and helping each other along the way. Choosing my first race to run for Congress in a district that, very hard. The 9th District, really hard. And not doing it just once, but twice. What has been really rewarding is going door to door in this race and having people say, "Shelley, go get them. You've earned this one." I really have appreciated the conversations going door to door, and you can't beat good old-fashioned grassroots work and organization.
Thanks for being here. You had a great question about white supremacy earlier, and a lot of you responded with ideas of education, which is definitely important when it comes to connecting to beliefs of racism and white supremacy. But also the research shows that it's not enough. We need policy change. It's really what makes a shift in terms of racism and white supremacy. So I'm wondering what your ideas are in terms of policy change to shift from institutional racism to one of more equity.
Thank you. And I'll start with Paula first.
The first thing that comes to my mind, I haven't really done the research, but the first thing that comes to my mind that I would explore first is to expand the definition of a hate crime and put more things, hate groups and that under, to make sure that there's both the carrot and the stick. you know, the education would be the carrot, but there also has to be the stick of certain things that we will not accept in our state.
I believe that the hate crimes law that was passed here was not comprehensive enough last year. The people claim it was. It's not. It does not get us off the list of the Anti-Defamation League, as I understand it. I will say, so that would be what I would push for on the policy end. I will say, as a native of Martinsville, about 22 years ago, we had a basketball game, you may remember, between Bloomington North and Martinsville. And my family's lived in Martinsville since 1830, deep roots. And I think going back to the education piece, after that game, a group of people in Martinsville came together and formed an organization called Pride, people respecting individuality and diversity in everyone is what that was called. I was glad to be a member of that. And we celebrated some diverse history of Martinsville, but also worked to educate the community. And that's a time where you saw people come together and understand what our history was, what it wasn't, and the process of education on this issue is never, ever, ever done. And I've been a part of numerous discussions about the issue, and both as a native of Martinsville and a student at IU. And so we're just never done educating on that, if I may say. Thanks.
Addressing white supremacy, making change, it does come, it's systemic. And it has to start with each and every one of us. I would join with Senator J.D. Ford at the state legislature in the Senate in his implicit bias training for all legislators to make it required and make it a law. It didn't even get a committee. And if our state legislators are saying that it's not important, well, what do you think the next generations are going to be saying? What do you think their communities are saying? It is important, and we need to be talking about it, and it needs to be started with our elected officials. And I'm proud to be endorsed by Senator J.D. Ford, and I will join him in that legislation.
As a teacher, one of, at least in education or in classes to become a teacher, we do bias training. It is a requirement. In fact, I believe it's state policy because every year we have to do more of it. We have to do cultural competency
We
training.
want teachers to do it, but not themselves.
We do it, and because of that, we can model and do that representation in the classrooms. But I don't think it would be unheard. I don't think it would be a bad idea. I agree, legislators should definitely do it. And that cultural competency for us many times is based on race, but I think it should be expanded for gender identity and the LGBTQ community. I think those are definitely underrepresented in the cultural competency training that I have been in. But I don't see why it couldn't be part of every career. I don't know how to legislate that yet, but I will learn. I will. I promise. I will figure that out. But honestly, I feel like every job has a training that goes with it. And I'm just going to stop there. We'll figure that out. Everyone should have it.
Thank you. So Natalia, for the sake of time, it'll have to be our last question. Oh.
Okay, I'll just say regenerative ag and universal basic income. What are your thoughts on that? Andrew Yang, 2024, baby. Oh, and I appreciate your door knocking. I've knocked on over 100,000 doors in 20 states.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you for running. I personally don't think anything will change unless we all help, both inside and outside our districts, to elect better representatives. So as a newly elected state representative or senator, what would be your number one issue? And what is one way you have worked in the past to fix it?
Let's start with John, yes.
My number one issue, I believe, Natalia, I think we start with education, with public education. As I said at the outset, pre-K is very important to me. You're 4 one time in your life, and we don't get those years back for those 80,000 4-year-olds in the state of Indiana. What I've done in the past, when I worked for Governor Frank O'Bannon, he was pushing for full-day kindergarten back in the early 2000s, and so I was on his communication staff and helped push for that in the legislature. Saw it cut down by folks across the aisle. So protecting public education, starting with pre-K. I think if you have a good start to your early childhood education, you're on the way to success later in life, and that's where I believe we should start.
My first piece of legislation is going to be adapting to a green economy, mitigating the severe changes that we're going to see in our climate, that we are seeing in our climate. It's what got me involved in politics to begin with, and it's only fitting that it'll be my first piece of legislation. We need to save our forests and our green spaces, ensuring that our kids have a healthy planet to live on. It must be our top priority, and the intersectionality of all of this. If we don't have clean water, clean air, it does affect our public health, it affects our mental health, it affects how we're able to perform in the classroom and on the job. It does affect, there's intersectionality of issues, but I would start with making sure we have a planet to live on.
I know my answer should be public education, and I don't disagree, but I feel like a living wage is probably number one. And the reason I say that is because when parents can earn a living wage by working one job instead of 3, they can then focus more on their children's health and academic needs. And when we do that, we will help reform public education. We will have that support that parents just don't have time and energy to necessarily give because they're trying to put food on the table and a roof over their kids' heads. So I guess public education is obviously the goal because that's what betters our future. But my way into that is through a living wage for every single person.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree with that, absolutely. A living wage, just by working one job so that people have time to spend nurturing their own children. And also needed time for recreation that people just never talk about anymore because nobody ever gets any because they're working so many jobs. But it's really critical to support good mental health. I think my top issue is also maternal child health. I support universal pre-K and policies that will make a difference in our infant mortality rate. And the infant mortality rate being the terrible rate that it is in Indiana intersects with a lot of other issues related to poverty and people of color. Also, I've spent a lot of my career helping women deal with the stress of poverty. And so I think maternal child health is really one of my top issues.
So we're going to move on to closing statements, and we're going to start this time with Shelley.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to my fellow forum participants. It's been a really good conversation. I'm Shelley Yoder. I'm running for State Senate District 40, and we're called to come together, and we are fighting in this campaign for what unites us. Strong public schools, a fair wage for our teachers, clean air and water, and a responsible response to the climate crisis, ending gun violence, protecting reproductive justice, better public health and wellness for all, and that includes the decriminalization of marijuana, reform of our unjust criminal justice system, an end to partisan gerrymandering, and equal opportunities and equity for all neighbors, especially members of the Black and brown communities and our LGBTQ siblings. I'm Shelley Yoder. I'm a mom, I'm an educator, a proud progressive, and I'm running to be your next state senator. I hope you'll join me in this fight, shelleyyoder.com, and vote May 5th. I hope I earn it.
I'm Tiffany Grant, and I am running for State House District 60. And when I was in college, I heard this quote: your journey is where, or your calling, your calling is where your great passion and the world's great need meet. And I have been looking for that since then. And I have tried education, And for 12 years, I have tried to do everything I can for every student and family that I meet, and it just hasn't been enough. I got my principal's license so that I could try to impact teachers who impact students and families in every way that they can. And looking ahead, I don't think that will be enough. I really feel like my deep passion is bigger than what I've been able to do so far. And we know Indiana's greatest needs. And so I would like to bring those two together to represent you in what I feel is the calling on my life. Please vote Tiffany Grant, State House District 60.
I'm Hoosier born and raised in a family of 9. After high school, I became a nurse because I wanted to be part of a mission greater than myself, and I wanted to help people. This led ultimately to a career in public health. My opponent has said that he wants to focus on infrastructure. Well, I think Hoosier families should come first. My focus is on supporting Hoosier families and protecting our environment. And this is the true infrastructure that we should be focused on. I ask you to invest in the future of Hoosier families by going to paulastaley2020.com and donate and volunteer to be part of our campaign. Most importantly, I ask that you vote for me, Paula Staley, to be your next state representative in District 65.
Well, thanks again to DFMC for hosting tonight's forum. I'm running for state senate because I love Monroe County and I love our state. And the issues we discussed tonight are what get me up in the morning and make me want to keep going no matter how hard it may get. That started for me as a volunteer for the Monroe County Democratic Party more than 20 years ago when I was tasked with finding the hay wagon for the July 4th parade. It continued when I served in state and federal government and in politics when I've had the opportunity to travel to every county in our state and learn what makes each community tick and to build bipartisan relationships at the state level. I believe I have a unique set of skills that will make me an effective state senator for Monroe County. I'm thankful to be raising my 2 children here with my wife, Erin, who's here tonight, and I'm so glad to call this community home. My name's John Zodi. I'm running for State Senate District 40, and I'm asking for your vote on Tuesday, May 5th, or when early voting starts on April 7th. Thank you again.
So let's give another round of applause to our candidates for coming. And thank you also for your questions. We're going to move into the next part of this forum, which is the 9th District congressional candidates, and we'll just have 1 minute to let everyone get settled and reset the stage and stuff like that. So don't go anywhere. Thank you. Okay, looks like we're just about ready to get started. And so it's my pleasure to introduce the 9th District congressional candidates who will be participating in this forum. Unfortunately, I know we said we have a lineup of 5, but Liam Doris, it appears, is unable to attend. So we have John Tilford running as an independent. Andy Ruff running as a Democrat. James O'Gavin, who's running as a Democrat. And Brandon Hood, who's also running as a Democrat. You can sit down. So candidate opening statements will be about 1 to 2 minutes, and we're going to start with Brandon.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. It does work. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Monroe County Library, and I want to thank the Democracy from Monroe County for putting this on. It's absolutely a big deal. My name is Brandon Hood, and I'm here to ask for your vote. I will show you tonight how I differ from my peers on this stage, and before that, I need to tell you why I'm running. This country is hauling dead weight. Laws, practices, and expectations designed centuries ago. These old ways and the politicians who kept them around must go. We must replace them with leaders and norms that make sense for modern America, because I know you want to help your neighbors. I know you've all helped your neighbors before, but what we do as individuals when a whole neighborhood or community needs help. Good, patriotic Americans can't help everyone in need while working full-time putting food on the table. Taking care of our communities is someone's day job, and it's not getting done. When cities and states misstep, it is our job, we the people, to restore order through checks and balances. That is not what's happening. Impossible circumstances like the choice between bankruptcy and health care, good schools and neighborhoods now or saving for college later. Americans have a proud history of standing for our neighbors. When fossil fuel companies drove workers to sickness and death, workers united and shouted, "Which side are you on?" When thousands of kids were dying in the jungles of Vietnam, the American people rose up and said, "Hell no, we won't go." That culture has given way to cold silence. The only thing required for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I'm done saying nothing. I'm ready to speak up, and I hope that you are too. This format isn't long enough to discuss everything, so please join us at hood2020.com.
James.
I'm James C. O'Gowan III. I'm running for a rural New Deal and fair labor. I'm here to establish or reestablish the labor union, the Farm Labor Alliance that we've had 60 years ago. I'm running for all teachers in Indiana and across the country. I'm running for families that do not have health care. I'm running for Jasmine, who's one of my students, and when Mr. Trump became elected 3 or 4 years ago, in November, she walked in crying. She was traumatized, and I looked at myself, and I'm a tough teacher. I'm not always moved by tears, but I was very much moved by this child. And I asked myself, this child is traumatized, and how am I supposed to teach her? This country is traumatized, and we need to go and reevaluate that. So that's why I'm running. I'm running for better health care, a better educational system, and my top 3 priorities are climate change, climate change, climate change. Thank you.
I'm Andy Ruff. I've been in southern Indiana my entire life, and for the last 20 years, I've served as an elected community leader here in Bloomington, and before that as a progressive community activist, fighting for things like living wages, stronger organized labor, universal health care, taking serious climate action, peace, public education, corporate responsibility, and getting big money out of our politics and out of our elections. Back in 2006, for example, before universal health care was such a big part of the national discourse, I sponsored a resolution advocating that to our state and federal delegations. In 2005, before the Fight for 15, I sponsored Indiana's first, and I think still only, genuine municipal living wage ordinance. Before the rush to invade Iraq in 2003, I sponsored a resolution for a closer examination of the evidence and consideration of the awful costs of war and supporting increased diplomatic efforts rather than rushing into war before the invasion. 25 years ago, I was the leader in the fight to stop a new major highway expansion as a terribly wrong-headed policy going into an era of climate change. You know, it's pretty clear to me already that all of us up here share fundamentally important basic values when it comes to issues of social, economic, and environmental justice for all people. But I think my roots, my record, and my experience are critical advantages that I have and I think believe make me a strong candidate to take on the Republicans in Trey Hollingsworth in the 9th District. I'm ready to take my life and leadership experience and use it to be a voice for all the people of the 9th District as our next congressperson. Thank you.
wonder if I have enough cord length here to stand up, start ranting and foaming at the mouth. Probably not. I'm John Tilford, and I've already heard some other gentlemen candidates here mention too much money in politics. I accept no donations, zero, none. My campaign right now is about $500, and that's principle. I tried that against Shelley, I think has left already here, the 2012 primary for this spin. Thank you, Sam. And came in 4th out of 5. You know, Shelley blew us away. But not that anybody cares. My data was how many votes did I get per dollar. The data from all the other folks is like how many 10s or 20s or 30s of dollars they spent per vote. Now, the reason for that, I think, is that some voters actually do research and actually care enough to look into the people. I owe everything to my mother, of course, as Lincoln said, but also to being 17 years old and too lazy to get out of bed down the street here at Indiana University, right quad. As a result, ran away, joined the Marine Corps, and grew up very quickly. And I've been shot at, never hit, which is fine with me, but it clarifies your thinking when you see human beings, little old ladies and kids, elbowing each other out of the way to get the garbage to eat as being shipped out of Camp Tinshaw. I found in my first social work job was when I transferred back to to Indiana, that is the United States, from a series of jobs with IRS after I left IU, others, and it's nice to make a living, but when I found out working for the VA that you could help people and change lives, and that's addictive, and I've never stopped. My hands are dirty now from a pin in the Scottish restaurant on the west side of town, McDonald's, helping veterans. And I realize that's the tip of the iceberg. Thank you for your prompt. And I get so frustrated with cases such as this one. It took 12 and a half years to help this veteran in the 9th District. We won, but his wife was dead. His sister was dead. And by this time, he's living in a trailer in Owen County. You can't buy your lifetime's back in that. That frustration drove me to run. And I'm John Tilford, and I'm running as an independent. What I need from you and anybody you can communicate with for me is to sign my petition to get me in the fall ballot. I don't go through a primary. Thank you.
So we're on to the DFMC questions for this round, and we're going to take turns responding, and this first question, James will start. So, considering ongoing concerns that America is unprepared for the spread of COVID-19 and the risk of a global pandemic, what policies will you enact to ensure that people have access to health care or possible pathways towards universal health care as a right for all Americans? James.
On universal health care, California's already voted in the primary. I voted for Elizabeth Warren. Even though she's withdrawn, I still stand by my woman, and I stand by her health care policies. So what she wants to implement and what Bernie Sanders wants to implement, I will be implementing as a national health care policy.
Andy?
I agree entirely with my fellow candidate that universal single-payer health care is the only way to do this. I believe health care is a right here in the richest nation in the world, not a privilege, and we should not have corporate-driven, profit-centered private health insurance. We should have public health, public welfare-driven health insurance. Its goal is not generating profits. Its goal is delivering health care. It can be done. Candidates have laid it out. Bernie Sanders on his website lays out multiple routes to generate the tax revenues to pay for this, and we will be able to. And there are studies that have been coming out. The one from Yale, was it Yale or Harvard recently, that showed we could cover everyone and save hundreds of billions of dollars and cover everyone better, more adequately than those that are covered now and still leaving out tens of millions of people. So this can easily be done. It's really frustrating to see the media and the establishment, even the establishment Democrats, try to confuse us and make us believe that this is somehow an unrealistic, insurmountable, impractical approach to providing health care for the country.
John?
Let me be basically a suffix here, supportive to especially Andy's expression. And just throw out some examples here for you. My son Aaron and I were meeting last October in London. He went to visit his little apartment where he stayed when he went over there to work for 6 months, one of these student kind of deal things, which turned out to be a hoax. But he couldn't go to work at Planet Hollywood for like several days. He had like 103 temperature, and he didn't know anything about health care, and he's about ready to, maybe he was close to death, I don't know. Finally, one of his buddies from work went really several miles out of the way on the tube, went to his place. Here's Aaron huddled up, shaking, said, "Are you an idiot?" "Oh, that's right. You're an American. You don't know what health care is. Here, come on down to the provider." Went down, has exams for like $20 or something, got the right antibiotics. He's back to work in a couple of days. No problems. Wasn't even a citizen of London, taken care of. Other examples. My wife and I were in outside Glasgow about 6 years ago, and we overheard a conversation over in the UK. The next table was evidently a wealthy lady and her friend. They were discussing a liver transplant for the wealthy lady's son, and how long he was having to wait for free to get a liver transplant. And well, that's maybe too long. And her friend reminded her, said, "Well, you can go to the private insurance firms, or if you're willing to pay these fees, and you move into a separate system." In other words, if you're rich, that's fine. There's always going to be a plan for you because money speaks. If you're not rich, you deserve to have health care in your country. Examples of working health care, Department of Veterans Affairs. Right up here at the VA Medical Center, Indianapolis Bush Medical Center. And then beneath that, contracted out, our VA community-based outpatient clinics have 2 offices now, one for, I hate to say mental, but let's say emotional issues, the PTSD folks, and maybe I am one, and the more traditional care right there at Landmark, where you see the flagpole. And it works. It's amazing. They have tiers for that access. If you have good income, you're a veteran, that's fine, but it works. And I'm not going to talk anything else about it because I start frothing at the mouth. Thank you.
Well, as we examine this issue, we have to really take into account how the medical industry works. We have insurance, middlemen deciding whether or not you get to live or die. And with the coronavirus issue, we see how weak we are as a medical system, as a nation. We are quite literally in the bullseye. I mean, when you have people that have to decide whether or not they can pay the bills or go get just your everyday test, that's a problem. Getting any type of medical, any medical debt should be wiped away clean right now, in my opinion. There shouldn't be such a thing. We shouldn't have a profit-driven system. And we need to also, and obviously we're all in the same boat on the single-payer healthcare issue. But also we need to think about how prescription drugs are handed out and how expensive they are. I mean, that's not a joke. I hear about people rationing their insulin. It should only cost $1. I mean, we also need to ban the idea of quote-unquote health insurance in the first place. That's just a way to get them to tell us no, so that they can save some dimes. And another thing I would like to see is avoiding all big pharma patents. All these patents that they have is just a way for them to have some sort of, proprietary means to keep control over us. And that needs to go. That's all I got.
Okay. So next question. What actions will you take to improve workers' rights, roll back so-called right-to-work laws that may harm working people, close the underemployment gap, and protect consumers from predatory practices and policies that have benefited millionaires like Trey Hollingsworth? And we'll start with Andy for this one.
I have a very strong record on labor. I worked closely with labor for 2 years in developing the city's living wage ordinance. And then after that, I was approached by the IBEW and others to work on a responsible bidder ordinance for the city, which is a legislation that labor often will ask local municipalities and local governments to try and pass. It helps to prevent bad employers from undercutting high-level employers that treat their employees well and pay all payroll taxes and don't try to cut corners. And those good contractors often get underbid by bad actors. And the responsible bidder ordinance we passed for the city of Bloomington was an effort to deal with that issue, and we need to take that to a higher level, all the way up to federal, all federal contracting, federal contracts. So the PRO Act right now, which I believe is out of the House and probably stands for Protecting the Right to Organize, will go a long way in promoting and strengthening labor, which we need in this country. Labor is the only effective the most consistent and the only real countervailing force we've seen in this country to the power of capital and business to exploit workers, and more in partnership with government to push everyone on a race to the bottom in this country. So there is legislation that's in the pipeline. We'll need to take the House and the executive branch back this time, and we'll do everything we possibly can. And I would do everything I can to strengthen labor, and I've been doing that for 20 years locally in every possible way I could. And if you check my record, you'll see many examples of that.
Thank you, by the way. And thank you, Andy, for answering all the questions, so I can just sort of always say ditto to your remarks. Thinking back over the years, of course, I was in all federal positions, both civilian and military, obviously. And I was frequently a bargaining unit person, didn't really get heavily involved in the respective bargaining units in the union. Got more involved when I switched over to the management side, pardon me, put the dark hat on for a while, even negotiate contracts. We started a couple of bargaining units, and I drove the local attorneys down what we here locally call a crane, drove the attorneys nuts because I didn't keep any secrets from the union. And so if there's new policy that came out from the Navy, I would say, union, are you aware of this? We're going to have a case on this in the future. Oh, no, you shouldn't share information. Well, of course you should. It's a teamwork event. You're supposed to help the working environment. Management and union are supposed to work hand in hand. When I retired early to go into more meaningful work, the union, and that was American Federation of Government Employees, 1415, contacted me to hire me to teach their union stewards. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm the bad guy here. No, it's because I was always honest with them and told them the right way to do it. And when they filed something frivolous, I would tell them it was frivolous and they could go hang their hat someplace else. Just be straightforward, and we're there to help the employees. I point out minimum wage, of course, is a disaster right now. I would see at least $15 an hour, federal, nationwide minimum wage indexed to cost of living increases, because if you don't do that, they'll just drag their way through, and it'll be as meaningless as the $7 is now. Will $15 be in 10, 15 years? The lesson there is don't let that happen again. Amazingly enough, the people that keep this nation going are workers. They are the productive people. Professional people are nice. Bargaining people do the work. And they deserve everything that they work for, and it's not enough what we give them now. We need to protect them much better. And they're frustrated is the reason I think many of them voted the wrong way in the last presidential election, and that's a lesson we cannot forget.
Thank you. Roughly, just over 10% of America participates in a union, and I fully support unions. I've never actually been in a union. I've always had interesting jobs, and none of them offered that. I absolutely would love to see right-to-work legislation repealed, effective immediately. I feel it's one of the biggest dupes that we've ever had in terms of legislation at the federal level. I'm absolutely in favor of $15 an hour minimum wage. I think that's actually still too low. I'd like to see 20. And I think that unions help us get there. They make sure that we have that political participation. Just real quick, show of hands. Does anyone here have a fast food job or work at Walmart or Target or any of those places? Okay, I want you to take that into account. Those people that work there can't be here because they're working more than one job. So they have to have $15 or $20 an hour to be able to participate in the political process. So that right there in and of itself is enough to support unions. But at the same time, we need to change how we look at what work is and how much work we're expecting of people that are only making $7.25 or $7.50 an hour, whatever. It's $7.50 now, right? Okay. It hasn't changed in such a long time. I have to remind myself. That's all.
James?
Yes, I'm I'm a local organizer, local chapter chair of UTLA, which is associated with which is an affiliate of the National Education Association, also the American Federation of Teachers, which is part of the AFL-CIO. I was a local organizer of the Los Angeles teachers strike. So we were in the rain for 6 days with umbrellas, red umbrellas. And I'd like to thank all my sisters, fellow faculty members and staff members at Mid-City Prescott on that, because the power was with unity. And that's the only way that we're going to overcome this anti-labor culture that we have within the country, is through unity. In fact, at Mid-City, we're fighting one locally now. So I have experience. My credentials are there with labor. And that's why I want to rebuild the Farm Labor Alliance within Indiana. We also need to look at the National Labor Relations Board, and now it's very pro-management. And we need to have a basic value that workers have a right to organize. This is a democratic society. They should have a right to organize. And also, it's already been mentioned, but labor organizations contribute toward a civic culture, just like churches that one do. Those organizations and different 4-H organizations, FFA, those organizations are between the family and the federal government. Federal government's too large, family's too small. You have those intermediate organizations. And because those intermediate organizations are deteriorating, we have a deterioration of our culture within this country. We don't have the civic activism that we have had in the past.
So we're going to go into one last question from DFMC and then open it up to audience questions. And so if you have a question for the panel, please line up at the microphone over here. Okay, so last question from DFMC. White supremacy has been on the rise nationally as well as locally. Members of white supremacist movements, such as the American Identity Movement, recently hosted a national America First conference in D.C., showing that white nationalists have become emboldened and are organizing in larger numbers. What are some policies that you would use to combat white nationalism in Congress? And we'll start with John.
John who? Oh, okay. My wife and I lived in Charlottesville, Virginia for a few years while I was working at the National Ground Intelligence Center. And it's a university town. It reminds you a lot of Bloomington. It's also an island of progressive thought within also reminds you of Indiana, within like a Red Sea. There are many white supremacists, as they showed on the television, as the one poor lady gave her life to that crazy guy with a car that killed her out there. I'm really concerned to make a plan for trying to educate some of these supremacists out there, because you can't reach them on Facebook, you can't reach them by conversation. Their minds are like, I swear to God, like closed. I think the only hope we're going to have is for the future, and that's through the education. And you remember the panel we had here before, and the discussion we had with working with the parents, and the minimum wage being raised so they can spend more time with their kids. My father went through this phase. He was raised down in Kentucky and came back, and he was flaming racist. Not flaming, I take it back. He's volunteer of the year of the Indiana, Sagamore the Wabash, all those kind of wonderful things later in life. But he also wrote, and he wrote that the experience of having an accident, a mule accident on his way to school, through a little black community, and how they cared for him when he was unconscious and took care of him. And one young man ran to get the nearest doctor to my father. And my father's eyes were open. And there's hope for him, and there's hope for those people out there. They're not born evil. We just have to interdict that with proper education and good media, and somehow fight this awful, I don't want to say fake news, but you know what I'm saying, from the right, the divisive type negative things. I'll mention one example before I move on to answer another question here for you, the secondary question. When I was in Vietnam on 50% alert, on the perimeter, and I was with the Black Marine. 50% means you can take turns sleeping until you're actually hit. And this is high humidity, but the wind's blowing across the top of our mountain, and you could get really, really hypothermia pretty quick. We had one sweaty, dirty sleeping bag between us. So that I could sweat in it first, or he could sweat in it first, and then we would slide down into the thing again. It didn't make any difference what color you were. You're helping the other person. I want to mention guns real quickly because they go together. The NRA piggybacks on this. We got to fight that arena as well.
Brandon.
Thank you. This is a bit of an emotional issue for me. I did a lot of work over the summer. I mean, I don't. For some of you, I was protesting at the farmers market this past summer. We absolutely had to deal with a certain vendor continually, and I'll be honest with you, it was saddening. It was saddening. It's not a joke to me. We have an incumbent need to change this issue. This is probably one of the most far-reaching issues that we have in this country. We have neglected entire communities while propping up white people. We have police that are an inherently racist institution, but yet they decide whether or not we get arrested, and it's obviously disproportionately against traditionally marginalized people. So I don't think it's just going to change. This is a dirty one. This is our dirty history, and I'll be honest with you, as a white cis-het male, I will say that I have not had to deal with this issue myself. Almost all of us in here have not had to deal with this racist issue. We're at a crossroads in this country, and I believe that when we have a leadership such as quote-unquote Trump, the racism is emboldened. And we have to make sure that we're fighting it every step of the way, so we have to take a look at ourselves. How are we propping up those traditions? How are we making people feel less than? What is it that we're doing day to day that we can change to make a small bit of difference in the world?
I grew up in rural Indiana, not even Tipton County, which is even more rural, one of the most rural areas in Indiana, perhaps in the country. My father, Irish Catholic, there hasn't been a lot written about Irish Catholics in rural areas, more so in the urban areas. But my father was somewhat discriminated, I guess you could say that, because he was Catholic. And one time, it was a big issue during that period to go to church or go to Mass, and they forced him, 3 or 4 of them jumped him when he was a kid, saying, will you go to our church? You know, of course, during that time, Catholicism and Protestantism this was before Pope John the 23rd, that Protestants were Protestants and Catholics were Catholics. So, you know, he was in a jam, 3 people, and he was down. So what did he say? Will you, the Protestant says, will you go to, are you going to go to our church this Sunday? What did he say? He said, maybe. That's where I learned my politics, maybe, with that response. And also Kokomo, which is not too far from, was one of the regional headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan. I forget the person's name, but the book just came out a couple years ago, and the first page was Kokomo, Indiana. So we have to fight, we have to battle this. We have to battle white nationalism, and we can't just blame the White House. It came from someplace, right? The White House is not that bright. Mr. Trump is not that bright. It came from a culture of white privilege. But I don't think you're going to fight it by calling white people racist. Somehow they get all defensive about that, right? And so I think we need to look at deconstructing whiteness. And why is whiteness so special? And why is, I always wondered when I was growing up, why was Jesus Christ always white? I mean, he had long hair, and he always looked like a hippie. But then in biblical terms, he had bushy hair, right? So it's a puzzle if you go with that narrative. So I would urge everyone to read Ibram X. Kendi, Kendi. He has some interesting thoughts about this area.
Okay, Andy?
You know, extinguishing the sort of darkness that lurks in the heart and mind of far too much of humanity, and always has, is a generational process that goes on generation after generation, trying to curve the arc, as King said, and we all need to do everything we can in every way we can in our own lives. As someone who's looking at elected office, particularly at Congress, I want to talk about more focusing on specific policies. And the entry of Bloomberg into the Democratic primary brought up the whole racial profiling issue, right? The stop and frisk policy. So while we're working to change the hearts and minds in every way we can to try and extinguish the darkness, we can specifically work towards policies like racial profiling and stop and frisk. And a congressional representative, a U.S. congressperson, should have the courage to use their office as a bully pulpit and to do everything they can legislatively to secure liberty for all citizens, not just people in certain neighborhoods and of certain skin colors. And as a 9th District Congressman, I would vote in favor of all legislation that helps to put an end to police violence against Black and other marginalized communities. I use powers of congressional oversight to ensure federal, state, and local police forces respect everyone's rights and abide by principles of equal treatment under the law. You know, the Constitution charges America with creating an equal society, but we don't have an equal society. We clearly have an unequal one. We always have. At times we've made progress, but the progress has only ever been made permanent when our congressional leadership creates new laws that further clarify and enshrine what the Constitution says in defining what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means to our society. And as a congressperson, I would be vigilant every day.
Okay, so we're now on to the audience portion, and we'll allocate about like 15-ish minutes because we'll probably have to get out of here soon. So if you have questions, please line up, and we're going to start with Brandon.
Hi. My question is, Liz Watson ran one hell of a race, and she still got blown out. Bloomington is fantastic. Monroe County is fantastic. What are you going to do to get 50% of the vote in not Bloomington? And the second question is, what do you know about universal basic income and why that's better than a minimum wage of $15 or $20?
Fantastic questions. I'll start with UBI because that's a little bit easier for me. The universal basic income, from what I've learned from Mr. Yang when I heard him speak about it, it was a certain amount given to each citizen no matter what, regardless of your economic standing. So there's one portion of that. I'm absolutely in favor of something like that. I believe that right now we're heading into an era of automation. We're also heading into an era where slowly but surely jobs are going away and robots are taking them over. But not only that, there's that constant profit motive from stockholders to make sure that you're profiting. You have to profit, and you're beholden to them. At least that's what they say. That's the excuses that they use. But one thing I would like to see is that, and I tell this to people a lot, is that anyone that has children, if you have children, I think every household, regardless of economic standing, should have a stipend given to them, that household, for each child that you are rearing. Basically what that means is you are helping with the population of this country. So that's a big deal. That is a huge responsibility. And many people, mainly women, are disproportionately affected by that, and they get unpaid. They're unpaid to take care of kids. So that's a big issue for me. And to answer your the other question about turning this district blue, we have to get out there and we have to get in those red areas. We can't stay in Bloomington. If we're in Bloomington, we know that our message is going to most likely be well received in Bloomington. We got to get out of it. We have to get out of Bloomington. the best thing that I can think of that we can do, because we're not taking any corporate PAC money, is that we knock on doors, we canvass, we make sure we're talking to organizers, we hit phones like it's nobody's business. That's really what we got to do. It may take 2 times, it may take another run at it, and I'm perfectly willing to do that, because I understand that we may not have that immediate success. So we have to be patient if it comes down to it. So that's what I got.
In regards to universal income, I would need to look at that a little bit more closely. I am familiar with Mr. Yang's proposal. I still go back, even if there's universal basic income, we still need unions, and we need to push back through unions and through those organizations. We still need those institutions, and one of those institutions that we need is labor, and we hardly have it now. Liz Watson and others, I'm proposing tonight. I'm not playing to my audience, but I would say that a person from California is more likely to be elected in the 9th than someone from Bloomington. And LA teacher and someone that is a native of Indiana. Why I say that, and this is all respect to everyone here, to my fellow candidates. There's been Liz Watson, and the person before that I think was Yoder that ran. So both have been from Bloomington, both have had far more money than any of us up here have, and they started a lot earlier, and we still have not captured that seat. And they were far more beautiful than I am too, and prettier. So I'm proposing that we need a different approach. We keep on approaching the same way, hoping for a different result, and I think that's foolish behavior. Thank you.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm going to focus my answer on the Bloomington part of this question, or actually the Bloomington question. It wasn't part of the question. These are 2 totally different questions. And I really only have time to deal with the Bloomington one, and that's one I really want to dwell on. My first week after I declared that I was going to run for this seat, I put in almost 600 miles in the district. Went to meetings in 7 different counties, 8 in the district, and I got the Bloomington question from people. And first of all, I want to dispel a myth. There's an assumption out there about Bloomington candidates. The last 3 candidates to run for the 9th District as Democrats were Shelley Yoder, Liz Watson, and Bill Bailey. Bill Bailey, popular mayor from Seymour, Indiana, popular mayor, went on to be a popular state legislator for several terms. Bill Bailey got 33% of the vote in the district. Shelley, in her best showing, I think got 45 or 46. Liz got, I think, 43 or 44. The Seymour candidate, who was a popular and well-known mayor from the heart of the district, Seymour, was the worst candidate. So and I had to talk about this when I went around the district at some of these meetings. And this whole thing illustrates what one of the things my campaign is about. And that's namely that the extremely powerful interests that control our economy and our politics want to divide us up, because they know that if we see and understand our common interests versus their special interests, that's the way we'll be able to take back the political power and economic power that we've lost and regain our share of control over our government and our lives. And they don't want to see that. They would rather see us fighting with each other over this, that, or the other social issue, or why people from Bloomington aren't like us and how different people from Bloomington are. That's what they want to see. So that's what they foment. And if we believe this, that Bloomingtonians are somehow different than the other Hoosiers, then we're falling into that trap. We're falling into that trap. And that's one of the things I'm campaigning against. Bloomington's not different than other Hoosiers. Bloomingtonians are fortunate enough to live in a community that's been able to do some of the things that most other communities in southern Indiana would like to do, whether it's providing social service safety net for people who fall out of work, or have a tragedy, who have a medical bankruptcy, having a living wage, taking care of our environment, investing in our education. These are things that the rest of Hoosiers want. We're no different, and I will be taking this message, continuing to take this message out, that Bloomington We all want good jobs for our kids and opportunities for our kids. We all want clean environment, clean water. We all want the same things. Thank you.
John?
I spent a little bit of time analyzing, or in my self-flattering word here, analyzing the elections, as evidently Andy has as well. We have a little bit different sources for our data. And I haven't really pushed my famous Tilford for Congress website yet, but it's obviously famous because now you heard it. But under Tilford for Congress, one of the earlier links is to a several-page study I did on all the previous elections. Well, not all of them, but going as far back as the last redistricting before the current one. And every one that's occurred since 2010, so let's say starting with Shelley the first time, we've been setting more and more records for margin of loss. Extra factor on Bailey was he happened to hit the nadir of the voter turnout, which always favors, but I wander off the point. Let's go back to what we're going to do here to do better, or I would do better, I hope to. And basically, we're in a red district, that's obvious. What do these red voters value? Farmers? Well, I grew up on a farm. I farmed in Greene County, but nevertheless a farm. They like fiscal conservatism. Well, I was a revenue officer. As a matter of fact, I was a revenue officer in Florida County, Clark County, Harrison County. And by the way, IRS had been gutted by Congress. We have $600 billion in assessed taxes already on the book not being collected because we don't have enough IRS staffing to do so. Shooting yourself in the foot. We have me getting my glasses out so I can see better. Typically, red folks like the military. Well, I had 36 years military. I started as a private in the Marine Corps, the Yellow Footprints in San Diego, and I finished as the Deputy Commander, National Ground Intelligence Center, full colonel. And that was not based on being popular. It wasn't based on being voted. It was being based on doing a good job and making bad choices. I had to, and good choices. I've worked not only in the southern part of the district, I've worked in Morgan County, I've worked in Monroe County. I've worked really, really, like the TV show, dirty jobs. And that's not only the farming, but it's like literally human waste type jobs, the Marine Corps and in the burn pit kind of things. That's how I try to appeal to the people in this red district. And there's no way to do that in a Democratic primary, which is why I'm here as independent. Appreciate your prompt. And I'll have closing remarks for you on that topic. Thanks.
I have used VA healthcare for 22 years now, and I've watched locally the system improve from a place where you could maybe get an appointment within a month for a non-emergent condition to a place where you can basically walk in now and be immediately triaged and be seen. But that's here in Bloomington. We have veterans spread all across the state in very rural areas, and they don't have the same access to VA health care that I have or that somebody who lives near Louisville or near Indianapolis or Evansville has. How do you propose to reach veterans who live in those rural areas who might have to drive 2 hours just for a routine appointment or to get a flu shot or to be seen if they have the flu? How do you propose to reach out to them and to make sure that they can access the health care that they need in the absence of a Medicare for All policy throughout the country?
So we'll start with James for this one.
Well, I believe that will be addressed within the Medicare for All plan. And I think I would need to further study that, but I think the first question is to ask the veterans in those rural areas, because oftentimes opinions are weighted toward the urban areas as opposed to the rural areas. So I would direct the valence toward the rural veteran and ask them how that would be designed, but I would think it would be a decentralized urgent care type of system and preventative system.
Andy?
Well, I think the questioner said outside of Medicare for All, so it's under the assumption that we don't yet have Medicare for All. And what I will do is say, and I think I can get John Tilford here to validate this. John and I have been talking for a couple months about this run for Congress, the 9th District seat, and I have tremendous respect for John Tilford, especially. I've seen for decades his dedication to serving veterans. When I worked for the county, starting 20 years ago.
I'm not going to pay you anymore.
He was the Veterans Affairs Coordinator for the county, and I knew and worked with him then. And so in our conversation we had a couple months ago, he said, Andy, I said, John, if I manage to win the district, will you be my Veterans Affairs guy, go-to guy? Will you be on my staff? Will you be there? And he said yes. And so this is an area where we have someone right here with tremendous expertise, and that's who I would rely on to guide me on what I should be doing as a legislator in every way to give veterans that we've promised and that deserve for serving us the services and benefits that they have earned and deserve. And it's outrageous and ridiculous that we glorify and we talk the talk about our veterans, but when it comes to providing everything they need and deserve and have earned, and we promise them, that we don't deliver. Thank you.
John.
May I speak to the women veterans aspect, which has only recently, finally, hit the VA that, oh, they're different, and then they figured this out. They react differently and these kinds of things, and they're finally, I think, getting their act together that way. And I don't want to say anything about this guy till maybe later after this thing. And we're not allowed to say, I'm thinking of a double attack here, a pinch or envelopment for this problem, the language. One being, it's kind of understood, the single-payer system, or also in Indiana, of course, they gutted the ACA as far as that helps the veterans in spite of our better wishes. If we'd had that, then we would be doing local doctors already through the Affordable Care Act. Moving back to the VA, though, they are doing a better job. And we do now have 2 locations here in Bloomington, as I mentioned earlier, and Martinsville has one. They're getting closer, getting better, but if you're in Davis County and some of these other counties down there, where the Air Force is a vulture going overhead, those counties, to be blunt, I'm making a bad joke here, it's a real problem. There have been Band-Aid approaches that the VA has proposed. I don't have the greatest faith in VA management, as you can imagine, but there have been proposals, and most of them are Band-Aid type things, and then Congress has screwed those up. There have been like, well, if we give you a card, we promise you a card so you can go anywhere you want to go. Oh, but it's got to be so many miles away. Or, oh, you've got to be overdue so much period of time. And no, let's say you're a Korean War veteran in the 80s, and they're trying to cope with all these restrictions, and they give up, and they don't get their care. Now, a couple of thoughts just briefly while we're brainstorming here is we've had problems in Indiana with the county service officers, but at least there's one in each county, with the exception of Marion County, by the way. But perhaps that's an avenue that the state could do. And they're trying to federalize that to a certain point. I'm just brainstorming with you, because I don't think we're going to get the feds to put the VA to put a community-based outpatient clinic in each county. I wish they would, but I just don't think that's going to happen. And I hate to place my faith on a single-payer system, but that would be great. Now, let me emphasize before I shut up here, you heard me shut up. Hollingsworth was in here trying to steer a little group that a couple of years ago, he had the guts to show up and expect to have his posterior kissed or whatever. And he's saying, he had one of these surveys like, do you love your mother, whatever, that kind of thing. And he was saying, don't you think we should go to more contracted out care for veterans? And I'm thinking, no, because the kinds of things that veterans have are Agent Orange related, or gunshot wound related, or shrapnel related, or PTSD related, because they've seen things that other people have never seen in their lives you don't want them to see. And the doctors that cope with those on a daily basis are very good at dealing with those things. That's not the walk-in IMA stop down here at Woods Crest Drive. No, they should not do away with the VA. No, they should not contract the out the actual care except for really basic things. You should have VA presence as close as possible to all the veterans. What that limit is, what as possible means, I don't know, but that can be determined. We do have the technology, as the people say, to determine what is feasible, and that is the right way to go. How close we can get there, I don't know. Back it would be the single payer, but you do the best you can. And I can make a lot of noise. If I'm in the Veterans Affairs Committee, I have cases at the wazoo. Why didn't you help this veteran? And I have one here in my hands, as a matter of fact, for 12 and a half years. Thanks.
Brandon.
Thank you. I'm not an expert on this issue. I have a little bit of something I can share though. When I spoke with healthcare providers, it was earlier this month, not healthcare providers, but people who work in the healthcare industry. I asked them, would you turn away someone? And all of them universally said no. And then I asked them, well, would you be in favor of single-payer healthcare? And I had one person say no, and she said the reason why she said no was because of the VA. The way the VA is the bad route the VA has is because of ill service. So she said that she would not be in favor of that because of how bad the VA has been underserved. So in the end, the fact that anyone gets turned away at all, the fact that there's even an issue is a problem. But these people go and overseas and they serve and they risk their lives, and then they come back and we say we don't foot the bill. It seems silly to me. There's over 2 million people that are in the armed forces right now. So if we start doing that math, I mean, we have to have forethought about this. I'm not going to stand up here and say I know all about veteran affairs. I think we have a pretty good expert right down here at the end of the table. So, but I will say this, that I think anyone that's marginalized outside of any type of system should be brought in. You have to try to make strides to bring those people in. And we also have to think about how overfunded and bloated the military budget is. We're spending over $775 billion a year. There's 900 bases in the world. We can close 10, 20, 500, and we can easily afford this. So it's really just a matter of choice. It's where are our priorities, you know? So that's what I have.
Okay, so we have time for one last question and then closing statements, because I think we have to get out of the library soon. Okay.
Well, the first gentleman to ask the question was actually very similar to mine in terms of your strategy for flipping this district. I felt like in the first go-around, Mr. Ruff gave the most substantive answer in terms of messaging, and Mr. Tilford also touched on how other surrounding counties in the district might differ from Monroe County. Yes, we have commonalities, common struggles as Hoosiers, but the bottom line is with the university here and things like that, there is a different socioeconomic makeup. There is a different, we talked earlier about kind of hot button issues that might not play as well in surrounding counties. So with that in mind, I'm curious as to the first two gentlemen, what would your messaging strategy be for the other counties in District 9 to make them receptive to your message to potentially flip the district? And on that note, Mr. Ruff, if you'd like to elaborate, when you said that Liz Watson and Shelley Yoder came so close within a 50% margin, what would you do differently in your strategy to take us over that 50% mark?
Okay, so we'll start with Andy for this one.
Oh, it's a little distracting.
Until the power goes off.
You know, I am a different kind. I'm a different kind of candidate, right? I am a semi-professional country musician, for example. You may think that's kind of silly, but I think that plays in the district. I can go to a county fair. I can go into the vendors areas where we have tables of all the vendors, and the parties always have a table. I can sit there with the guitar and play Waylon Jennings and the Hank Williams Jr. songs all afternoon long as people come by. I intend to round up my band, go to little towns. Some of them still have radio stations, independent stations. Plan to do interviews, play music. I am an avid outdoorsman, fisherman. I've been on all the streams and rivers all over the state, including all through the 9th District. I can talk to people on that level. because we have shared interests. I believe that I have a skill and a connection to reach people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. And I believe I can do it, and I've already started doing it. I've been out extensively in the district. Actually, I've been doing it all my life. I've got friends out in the countryside along every stream and river in the state of Indiana that I can call up at the drop of a hat and say, what's the water level look like? Is it muddy? Is it up from the rain we had the other day? I want to come float and fish. And they'll say, water looks great, Andy, you should come. Do it now. So my strategy is not to spend, I'm probably not going to be able to raise and spend as much money as, for example, Liz Watson did. The 9th District was considered a competitive district last time by state and national level organizations and the Dfmc. The 9th was a district to watch, they thought, in Indiana. So it was invested in a little bit. It's not going to be that way this time. I'm going to be more about being out every day, every weekend, out in the district, meeting people.
John, do you want to answer this one?
I don't really like fishing. I get really bored at fishing. But no, I mentioned earlier some of the commonality I have, and I like your terminology there with the people outside our progressive island. But let me just throw this out. I've been several times in my life thrown into a position with no warning and had to do the best I could at the national level. I was driving to work one day when I was working for Defense Intelligence Agency on the Maryland side of the river, and the Indian Parliament in New Delhi had been shot up by some terrorists. I said, oh crap, because those are my two countries, Pakistan and India. And by 4:30 the next morning, after working straight through, I had a document on Indian retaliatory options, most of them being military retaliatory options. And that paper went out, top secret, no foreign level, to the world, basically, and it made me a career. I can't hand it to you because it's still classified. After there used to be good directors of DIA, forget Flynn. The director at that time gave me a team because the Secretary of State, Powell, and Secretary of Defense, Rummy, had seen the paper, and they wanted this guy to give them a weekly update. So I was doing a weekly paper and had a staff to do that. So one day somebody else comes up and says, Tilford, I said, well, yeah, what do you want? Well, the J2, the senior intelligence officer for the United States in the Pentagon, had just said, you're relieved to, he's a briefer for Afghanistan, says, you're the new chief of the Afghanistan cell, you report 4:30 tomorrow morning at the Pentagon. Those kinds of things. And I can do that. Thank you.
In terms of messaging, we understand. I have lived in Bloomington for 20 years. I am a son of Indiana. I have lived in Marion. I've lived in Indianapolis, Shelbyville. Shelbyville is where I'm originally from, a very red county. So I have grown up knowing what the vernacular is in the conservative realm, and there are buzzwords we can't say. I want to say them, but Green New Deal is something that's probably not going to fly over well in the red areas. So instead of saying Green New Deal, we talk about infrastructure development and getting rid of old technologies. Most everybody's pretty much behind that. In terms of Medicare for All is a huge one. I think almost everybody realizes that at some point in their life, they're going to be required to be in the hospital, and they don't want to lose their entire life savings or their family's life savings to do so. So, there are issues that we can connect on. And we have to make sure that when we do have messaging, that it's concise, it's consistent, and I feel that I'm passionate enough and I can relate to people very well. I want this job. I want to be your representative. So that's what I would do.
James,
What was the question again? Was it?
what's your strategy?
Okay.
Messaging.
My personal strategy is one, I think I've already contributed to the 9th Congressional District and to this campaign by raising the residency issue. The residency issue with the incumbent was raised 4 years ago, and it was raised again a couple of days ago with Mr. Ernest. I forget his last name. And he asked the congressman, what about this residency? He said, well, I moved, my wife wanted to move in Indiana to be next to the wife, my wife in Louisville, or the mother in Louisville. So in other words, that's the mother-in-law, right? So my question is, who would want to move closer to a mother-in-law? All apologies to the mother-in-laws in the class. So what I'm saying, he's disingenuous. At least I'm forthright about my residency. I'm not moving until the votes draw me back home to Indiana. So that's my statement on that. My strategy is I'm from Tipton via California. We will have to raise $1 million, $2 million. I know the attention is now toward Fort Wayne, but I think it's a very bad strategy of the state Democratic Party to focus only on one congressional district, that we need to force every congressional district, every Republican to spend lots of money. You say, well, they have innumerable amount of money. But Republicans, like anyone else, they hate to spend money. So we need to force them to make money, to spend money. Okay.
So we're on to closing statements, and please keep your closing statements no longer than 60 seconds. And we're going to start with John.
www.tilfordforcongress.com. Please, first website ever built in my life. So do me the courtesy of giving me a negative or positive review. I don't care, as long as you look at it. I think I'm trying to run to save the United States. If Liz had to raise $2.5 million and is perceived as barely competitive for $1.5 million tray and failed at 13% marginal loss, we have problems in the progressive arena in this district, obviously. I don't want to play that game, and I'm not going to play that game. I'm going to be an independent, $500 to date. All I need is signatures. I need your signatures. And this guy who's been all these things that those red people seem to profess to value out there, and I'm the disabled vet, and I'm the guy that's done the dirty jobs, and the guy that's been shot at, the guy that's helped veterans, the guy that helped other people. Go to the website and take a look at tilford.com, and you can vote for whoever the heck you want to, but I got to get your names and petition to get on that ballot. Thank you.
The silence of our local and federal leaders has left a vacuum. Our neighbors who are the most vulnerable are left with spin and excuses. It's not good enough. Our eyes and our ears are not lying to us. Marginalized communities will tell those willing to listen their demands are not extreme. Healthcare is a basic human need that all must have met. Millions live in fear of getting sick, and that is not right. Wages remain stagnant, while the richest pad offshore accounts, and every night millions sleep on the street in the wealthiest country on earth. So I have to ask you, which side are you on? When someone is denied health care so a CEO can get a big bonus, I'm on the sick person's side. When workers are 3 bad months away from homelessness and their boss says they don't deserve a raise, I'm on the workers' side. So I'm joining you today to ask your neighborly support. So long as you believe in justice for all, we are in this fight together. Whether you're conservative, leftist, brown, black, white, native-born, or immigrant, cis, trans, hetero, or LGBTQIA+, I'm on your side. We the people possess great strength when we unite, when we care for each other, prioritize each other, and meet each American's basic needs. Our communities are happier, healthier, and more resilient. These are my principles and the foundation for my campaign. With those priorities in mind, I'd humbly ask for your support in this election and this fight. Please go to your neighbors, make sure they are registered to vote, make sure their needs are met, and once you've got your community behind you, please help me take the congressional seat in Indiana's 9th District. For regular Americans, go to hood2020.com. Thank you.
James.
Yes, elect James O'Gowan for a rural New Deal. That's my economic policy. My social policy is that we need to eradicate racism. But the conundrum is with racism, race is in there. And we're one race, and that is a human race. But social racism is real, and that we need to address it. And we need to address it straight on. We need to address we need to be out on the front lines. Most in this audience are white. We need to be arm in arm with our African American community, our brown community, Latino community, every community, Asian community, that we're one human race, but we need to address this social racism because Mr. Trump did not tap this out of a vacuum. He had sinews that were running undercurrents throughout this country, and we need to address that straight on. So again, the real New Deal is my economic policy, my social policy. We need to address privilege and deconstruct whiteness straight on. And then that's how we're going to neutralize Mr. Trump. Elect James C. O'Gowan III, LA teacher.
Andy.
I think everybody in this room knows that this is a pivotal election for our nation and our democracy. It'll define who we are as a nation and a people, and it'll help determine what our future is going to be. The strength of our voices in deciding what's best for our communities and our families is being diminished all the time. Broad prosperity is being lost as more and more wealth from our economy is being funneled up to the top. I want to use my voice to help restore everyone's voice. We have to overcome our divisions to take back the power into our hands, the hands of ordinary people, where it's supposed to reside. I have a 20-year record consistently developing and supporting policies that promote a strong and fair economy with broad-based benefits to everyone, of protecting our environment, addressing the reality of our climate crisis. You know, I think it's clear that everyone up here, all the candidates, again, share important basic values of social, economic, and environmental justice. But I also have a clear and long-standing progressive public record and the demonstrated experience, commitment, and ability to work with people of diverse viewpoints and backgrounds to find common ground and make real progress. Legislation doesn't just get passed because it's the right thing to do or a good idea. You got to work at it, and I have experience working at it.
Okay, let's give our candidates a round of applause. And we have to get out of here, but we have the DFMC March Link Up this Thursday at 6 o'clock right here, and we're going to be talking about the parking garages. Thank you.